I'm wondering if each of you could make a comment on Peter Cullen's quote that I mentioned earlier before. Would you like to start, John, seeing you're so...
Still fired up?
Yep.
Well, look, I think an active citizenship is the most important thing for a democracy. I think an ancient Greek said in a few thousand years BC, I've forgotten it now, but it's a quote I have on the wall about suspicion and questioning is our best guard against tyrants. I also have on that chart a quote from Spike Milligan. One day the don't-knows will get in. What will we do then?
Okay. Lee, what do you feel about it?
We're all in this mess together. I think that exemplifies intergenerational equity and common but differentiated responsibilities for sustainable water management. If we're going to solve the mess, it has to be done equitably and it has to be done in the long term. So, yeah.
Agree?
I think what was being said there by Professor Snedden was that we basically get what we deserve in terms of politics and decision makers. And I think we've known about climate change for over 20 years, and I think our leadership and our media is absolutely culpable for distorting the nature of the debate over the last decade.
Got something to add?
Well, coming back to the topic that I was speaking about today, I think food is actually symbolic as well as actually practical. And when we think about how disconnected we can become from what we eat, I think that's an indicator of how disconnected we are from the environment in general. And that is what has, I guess, allowed these sorts of crises to creep up on us. And so I just urge everyone to take interest in that particular issue, but more generally just to avoid the sort of othering and finger-pointing that can happen in these debates, and that to understand in particular that agriculture's not out there to do the wrong thing, but it's really in a lot of difficulty and is really trying very hard.
Lovely. Okay, now it's your turn. Do we have somebody that has got a burning question?
Yeah, look, given that the Victoria's coal plants use a third of Melbourne's drinking water, and the Climate Institute has set up a policy position along with the CFMEU, the New South Wales Minerals Council and the ACA to promote clean coal with carbon capture and storage, which uses even more water than conventional coal.
Your question?
The question is, what's your policy position? You're quoting Al Gore. Al Gore's for 100% repowering America with renewable electricity, but the Climate Institute are the last bastions of, the environment movement who are running this coal line. So where do you stand?
Yeah.
Water is going into the coal plants. That's
John?
why.
It's true. We have backed this technology. But what we've said is, that, and along, in fact, with Al Gore, in fact, with James Hansen and others, that we must put an end to new coal-fired power plants, that we need to be clear that we can't let this hope or promise of this technology hang around like a bad smell. What we did was saying, and standing up with Worldwide Fund for Nature, the unions and the industry, is set a target for development by 2020 of commercial scale. What we also said, just let me finish, I'll answer your question. Our clear policy is about having a mixed portfolio of clean energy options at commercial scale by 2020. So we know very clearly then where everyone stands. This is calling them to account and to have a mix there. And we need to have, in particular, geothermal, solar thermal, as well as wind and other options. So that's our policy position.
Next question,
please. Yes, Madam Chair, I have a question. I'd like to ask the panel. I wonder if we have no water crisis here. What we really have is a crisis of vision. We have a national transport system. We have a national electricity grid. Why don't we have a national integrated water network?
Well, I'd first ask what you mean by a national water integrated link, and I'd then put climate change with that and ask, have you considered the greenhouse gas emissions. Water is very heavy to move around. Do you want to... Well, firstly, I'd say that floods are very ephemeral things. The second thing is to move it down, there are certain issues in terms of how you actually move it down, as you say, that ditch. And I would argue that simply turning river systems into huge concrete sort of or water delivery things was the issue that got us into the mess in the first place. And I would suggest that we maybe need to rethink things. I guess that was the thrust, that simply looking at water delivery to us in the cities may be a very narrow view.
I'll just be very brief on this. The issue of moving water, as has been said, it's very expensive, but I do agree that we need a national approach, not just to water, but to carbon and the issue of energy as a whole. But if we actually start fiddling around with our water systems, the lessons that we've learned over and over again, or perhaps failed to have learned over and over again, is if you've got an environmental problem, you have to solve it with an environmental solution, and that the engineering of grand schemes that go counter to that environmental movement are just disastrous. And so it seems a quick fix, there's a logic in it, but it's just another shortcut to another environmental disaster.
Another question?
What impact on a household water usage would a vegetarian diet have? Would that be large?
Well, it's quite a complicated and contentious issue, but I mean there is some research that says that the most effective thing any individual can do to reduce their water consumption is to stop eating meat. There are, of course, there is, of course, meat production and there's meat production, you know, and some of the meat production in Australia is the most water efficient in the world, and in terms of our pastoralism, I mean, pastoralists aren't asking for water from anyone. So there are all those sorts of issues, as well as, of course, storage, refrigeration, transport, etc. So without giving a prescriptive answer, yay or nay, to vegetarianism, all I would say is that it is worth looking into, and we can certainly support our meat producers to do what they can to continue to make Australian meat as water efficient as possible.
Mine is a bit of a triple header, but I'll make it quick. Water is a human right. Competition policy and the unbundling of water after COAG in 94, which has led to the commodification and marketisation of water. Thirdly, Lee, you spoke of integrity, and I'd like to see if you would comment on the integrity of a situation where the biggest water treatment company in the world sits on a Victorian regional public water authority with whom it does business, and it is it's in one of the two consortia being considered for the desalination plant. Is that integrity?
All right, Lee?
Yeah, I think it's probably... other people can join in. Look, I think this is an issue, and clearly it was something I was putting on the agenda, about the independence and transparency of water use, water management across the political spectrum. And I think these are important things. I think that one of the things about living in a democracy is the capacity for public comment, discourse, and to have access, for example, to courts if we think that we want to challenge the executive arm of government. These are rights in a democracy. But I think that one of the things that has distinguished water decision-making historically, and it was part of that development focus that I was talking about, is that a lot of decision-making about water has actually been non-transparent or has been less than transparent. And I would argue strongly that we need to look to processes that will open up the transparency and the integrated character. So it takes into account climate change. It takes into account whether we need to balance it with use in our agricultural areas. So I'm not saying that simply one entity sitting on a group is the finger pointing. I'm saying we need a much broader conception of how we bring the public, transparent processes to our decision making. So yes, I would agree.
Helen, my question's to you. You talked about barriers to change that exist that prevent some new agricultural modes. Would you like to sort of elaborate on what those barriers you think might be?
Well, where do I start? So at a structural, sort of institutional level, we have some fantastic scientists, some fantastic researchers working on it. One of the barriers I'd identify there is that traditionally our research is divided by commodity silos, and that sort of siloed thinking, if you like, means that these cross-sectoral issues such as water don't get necessarily the attention that they necessarily need. Coming down then, just for a few examples at the farm level, there's all sorts of barriers there, but one would be related to the research, which is the sort of linear transfer of technology model that we've had in place, the sort of expert scientist, ignorant farmer type mentality. That has been a big barrier to change, both because farmers are distrustful of those trying to deliver messages in that model, and also because they themselves, of course, have so many good ideas. And so there's a couple. In terms of where we're at the moment, as I mentioned, people don't have the time, the energy, the mental energy, the money to put change in place. What I'll just leave you with is that change is expensive, not just in money terms, but in terms of all of that kind of energy that it takes. And we can't underestimate what we're asking our agricultural sector to do. Okay.
You want to make a comment? Could I just add to that one of the barriers that I certainly see is that we don't really know the value of water. And so until we actually know what it's worth, how can you do a thorough cost-benefit analysis? And the other thing that I'd have to comment on is the sort of the typical Victorian and indeed I say Melburnian self-righteous ignorance. I've had many colleagues tell me that people have actually told them off for watering historic trees in heritage-listed landscapes to keep them alive. And they're being self-righteous because they don't understand the role of the vegetation and all of the benefits that we talked about earlier. And I can tell you now, there will be people in the audience here saying, well, what about our native plants? If we plant native plants, they don't need water. That's simply not true. And no one has done the breeding, the research or the selection to make our native plants the really great plants they could be in urban landscapes. So here we want trees, for example, to perform like the plane tree or the elm that have been bred and selected for 500 and in the other case 4,000 years. And we want our native vegetation to perform as well without any breeding or selection. Now, the plants will perform well, but you've got to put a little investment into it, and we're not doing it into many of these sectors. It's not just horticulture, agriculture, and natural forests are exactly the same.
What about recycling of water, like sewer?
I think I'll take that. Look, I think that that was one of the points I was making, that we've tended to go for the big fix solution, and that has really limited us looking at a lot of other solutions. I think recycled water was clearly on the agenda, but I think there was a ricochet effect after the Toowoomba sort of debacle, and I think... Yeah, look, I mean, various degrees of recycled water are already used. It's just not known that it goes into various water supplies in various ways. So I would be a strong advocate of exploring further recycled water options, and I think that that is happening, but it probably would have happened a lot faster if we hadn't sort of gone for the quick fix, big technological solution.
And I have to say that for parks and gardens and urban landscapes, recycled water is absolutely fantastic. And we've already done research here and elsewhere that shows if you put some polluted water into the root system of a landscape and with trees in it, what comes out and back to the groundwater has less nitrogen and less phosphorus in it, which normally come from droppings and the like around the city. So you can get a win-win-win, quicker growing trees, cleaner water, and the water's recycled, so we're all for it.
On that very lovely positive note for win-win, I'd like to bring our evening to a close. May I thank the City of Melbourne for their continued commitment to these conversations, and a very special thank you to Jeff Taylor for his wonderful work. Thank you for coming.